It's a pretty fair assumption that in the video game world, some games are just destined to be cheap. Okay, that sounds a little rude. Let's say affordable. But the path to being an affordable and commonly available title isn't written in stone. A game can sell millions and millions of copies and be a huge success, or it can be a piece of shovelware that nobody buys and nobody wants. However, in some extremely rare instances, some games manage to be common and affordable while also having a particular variant that demands 5, 10, or even 100 times its normal selling price. Take, for example, a perfectly normal copy of Dino Crisis. The game holds some value, sure, but it's far from rare, and a black label copy will run you about 50 to 70 bucks. But why would you do that when you can pay over $200 to get it in green? So today, let's explore a few more instances just like this, otherwise common games with some extremely rare and expensive variants. Part 2. Although you don't need to go watch my first video on this topic before watching this one. And this time, the price tags are much higher, including what might be the most expensive PlayStation game across every Sony generation. Stick around to the end and I'll tell you what it is. Lock in and let's go. What is going on, everyone? My name is Evan. Welcome back to the Evil Slaw channel. Really quickly before I get into it, I want to ask you guys, do you know any other games that are pretty cheap but have variants that make them very, very expensive? Leave me a comment down below. In my last video, you guys were amazing leaving comments, and some of them made it into this video. If you enjoy, I would appreciate it if you can hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Enough talking. Let's get to our first entry. It was May 10th, 1995. The Sega Saturn had already launched in Japan, and the North American release was still about 4 months away. Except it wasn't, because Sega decided to release it literally the next day. It shocked everybody, and one of the few games that was available on this rushed launch day was the port of Sega's arcade smash hit Daytona USA. There was a lot riding on Daytona, but unfortunately this version of the game does struggle in some key areas. The graphics feature a ton of pop-in, there's very little new content versus the arcade, the game runs at just 20 frames per second, far cry from the arcade's buttery smooth 60. I still think this version's a lot of fun, it was a lot to expect. 60 frames a second on the Saturn, though critics at the time felt it didn't stack up favorably to the arcade and eventually Ridge Racer on the PS1. However, by the end of the Saturn's life, there ended up being 4 distinct versions of Daytona USA that would release across the world. This 1995 original, a revised Championship Circuit edition that boosted performance but made tweaks to other aspects like handling and graphics, and there's a lot of debate of which one's better. There was a further revised Circuit edition which only saw release in Japan, and our subject for this video, Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition, Netlink Edition. Now that's a title. Eat your heart out, Nintendo. If you want any other version of Daytona USA, it's not a lot. It'll cost you anywhere from 10 bucks to maybe 40 bucks depending on condition and what region you're getting it from. But according to price charting, this Netlink edition runs for over $4,300 for a loose disc and nearly $8,000 for a complete copy. Wow. It's widely considered to be the rarest Sega Saturn game known to man, and there's only a few listed on eBay right now for absurd prices. You see, Netlink Edition was only released here in the US, and it was one of the few titles to support the Saturn's ill-fated online service of the same name. Players could only obtain this version directly through Sega, and if the black and white printed cover says anything, I bet they weren't expecting to move very many copies. This was also February of 1998, and everybody knew the Saturn was doomed here in the US. One thing you may not know about the Netlink Edition is that it actually more closely resembles that Japanese Circuit Edition I talked about versus the American Championship Circuit Edition. Thus, Daytona USA Netlink remains a unique anomaly in a console library that's already filled with extremely expensive games. It remains a target for only the most dedicated Sega collectors to the world over, and to them, we tip our proverbial hats. In the wake of the September 11th attacks here in the US, there was a concerted effort to recall or postpone media projects which prominently featured the World Trade Center towers or any other sensitive imagery which might have been deemed offensive in a very sensitive time. One of those properties which saw a lot of changes during this time was Spider-Man. At the time, Sony had to pull a trailer and a poster for the upcoming 2002 Spider-Man film from Sam Raimi, but more immediate changes had to be made to Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, the PS1 follow-up to the excellent Spider-Man game from the year before. It was originally set to release on September 18th, 2001. It did not. Instead, Spider-Man 2 was delayed by 1 month to October 18th, and a number of changes were made within that short time. Most prominently, the game's final level was actually set to take place on top of the World Trade Center, but in the final release, the two buildings were made into one by this bridge, and the exteriors were just made more generic. There were also some stage titles that were changed and some cutscenes altered. We know all of this because some copies of that pre-9/11 version of Spider-Man 2 actually did make their way into the public's hands. With 1 week until release, these copies were absolutely printed, packed, and ready to go. Most were recalled and likely destroyed, but a few still managed to surface. Now, I'll be honest, I had some real trouble finding accurate pricing information for this one. A user on Reddit said he paid $250 for one in a private sale about 4 years ago, but as it stands, there aren't any pre-9/11 copies on eBay besides one prototype for $1,500, so the price range here is just massive. For reference, a regular copy of Enter Electro only charts around $50. One thing I should note here is there's not really a clear indicator to tell which copies are pre-9/11 ones either. A lot of copies we know are pre-9/11 have a hole punched through the back of UPC, which usually indicates that it was a copy given to retailers or journalists for promotional purposes. Otherwise, there are no exterior tells. And Spider-Man 2 wasn't the only PlayStation game affected by 9/11 either. Siphon Filter 3's cover art was supposed to look like this, with the game's main character standing inside an American federal building, seemingly consumed in some sort of green gas. In the aftermath of 9/11 and the anthrax panic that ensued, Sony made the decision to change the game's cover and some of the wording on the back of the box. Just like Spider-Man, a few of these copies did make it out into the wild, and an otherwise $15 game ends up selling for hundreds, if not thousands. Next up, we have the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection, more specifically, the first print of the ESRB release. Now, the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters are Unity-based reworkings of the first 6 FF games from the NES and Super Nintendo. These remasters first hit the scene exclusively for iPhone, Android, and Windows in 2021, and they didn't make the jump to consoles for nearly 2 years. When the Pixel Remasters did go over to consoles, it came with an announcement in December of 2022, with Square Enix unveiling this limited physical release and a really nice collector's edition, which had a vinyl selection of the series' best tracks. It's one of those things I really wish I had. But when Square said it was a limited release, they were not kidding. Pre-orders went live shortly after the announcement, but in the actual dead of night. People reported pre-orders opening around 2 a.m. in some parts of the country, and they sold out extremely fast for both Nintendo Switch and PS4. If you want to grab one of these first print copies, it'll run you about $110 or so on Switch and over $400 on PS4. That Switch copy did used to fetch a fair bit more, but thanks to loads of region-free import copies and the eventual reprint we got under the Anniversary Edition banner, the Switch version has gone down a fair bit. However, that original PS4 first print has managed to retain a lot of its value, even with the Anniversary Edition. I remember hearing stories of the original PS4 run being much smaller and selling out almost instantly on the Square Enix store, whereas you had a little bit more of a chance to get it on Switch. If you do want to grab one of the more common prints of this collection, expect to pay about $50 secondhand for an import copy or an Anniversary Edition. But if you're a hardcore Final Fantasy collector with a lust for something a bit more unique, well, maybe this first print is right up your alley. By the year 2002, no media franchise was on top of the world quite like Shrek. The first film released the year prior to massive success and critical acclaim, but more importantly, the kids loved it, so Dreamcast quickly went to work trying to sell as much Shrek merchandise as they could. One move that DreamWorks took before the film's release was signing over the video game rights to publisher TDK. And in 2002, we saw 2 Shrek games hit the market: Shrek Extra Large for the Nintendo GameCube and Shrek Super Party for the PS2 and Xbox. Shrek Extra Large may be the best or worst title for a video game I've ever heard. I guess it depends on your perspective.
We were just attacked by a big-ass lizard.
But it's actually a port of this Shrek game for the Xbox, with some reworked elements to make it extra large. Super Party, on the other hand, is exactly what it sounds like, a party game, and not a very good one. In fact, both of these games received pretty bad reviews, but it was Shrek, it was new, it was hot, and they sold pretty well. So if you want to grab a copy of each of these games today, you can do so for relatively cheap. But take a look at the box art I have on the screen right now. Enhance the image. You see that? Both of these games included a free Shrek watch. And if you want to track down that watch, well, it changes everything. This is the watch in question, a simple little keychain watch that you can't even wear on your wrist. And somehow, it jacks up the value of these games by an astronomical amount. For whatever reason, it is exceedingly rare, and finding a copy of these games with the watch included is damn near impossible. Not every variant of these games included the watch, and I will say I've seen one in the wild once. This isn't my picture, but I remember seeing it with my own eyes. This is at the Book Off location in Midtown Manhattan, and I vividly recall this factory sealed copy of Super Party on display for $1,500. Eventually, it was reduced to 1,000, and it had to have sold for that much because it's not there anymore. And at the time I'm writing this, there is not a single copy for sale on eBay with the watch. Back in 2023, one listing was documented with a final sale price of $6,500. And I know what you're probably thinking. Is somebody actually paying that much money for this? Well, I guess it's important to remember that the true value of a game or some rinky-dink plastic watch isn't what price charting or eBay says. It's whatever someone actually chooses to pay for it. But at least from what we can see, there are examples of people ponying up to get this game with the watch. If you want to know more about this topic, I highly recommend you go check out this video from Steve. It covers everything in length, including a theory about possible market manipulation. I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with that, but it's definitely thought-provoking. So forget about a Rolex or an Omega. If you see someone swagging around with this watch, just know that they know ball. And speaking of ball knowledge, we come to the very last entry for this video. NFL Blitz 2000 for the PS1. You probably knew this was coming. Releasing in August of 1999, NFL Blitz 2000 is a port of the arcade game of the same name. It's an arcade-style American football game. In my opinion, a ton of fun. I had a great time playing it for this video. If you want to get a plain old black label copy of Blitz 2000, it's only going to run you about 20 or 30 bucks. But like I mentioned at the beginning of this video with Dino Crisis, if you want it in green, well, you better have some green. Lots of it. The true reason why NFL Blitz 2000's greatest hits variant is so extraordinarily expensive is a little unclear. Remember, this all happened before the PS2 hit the market, so PS1 games were still in high demand. By 1999, Sony required a game to sell at least 500,000 units and have been on the market for 1 year before it could qualify for a greatest hits reprint. And the original NFL Blitz had no problem overcoming this hurdle, though the threshold at that time was a little bit lower. It's really hard to find concrete sourcing for this, so I'm more so running on word of mouth and old gaming legend, but that legend has it that NFL Blitz 2000 never actually qualified for a greatest hits release. It's not clear whether it was based on sales or if it wasn't on the market long enough, we don't know. But Midway printed a greatest hits variant anyway. It could have even been a mistake, but whatever it was, very few copies actually made it into customers' hands. And I've seen some people say that it was actually recalled by Sony themselves. Others think it was an extremely small print run. It could have been a mix of both. But what we do know for sure is that the greatest hits variant of NFL Blitz 2000 is absurdly rare. Copies just don't pop up on eBay all that often, but I did see one recent sold listing for almost $15,000. There was also this listing, but it's been since deleted and it appears to have been fake. Price charting has this game at $5,700 for a complete copy and over $15,000 for a sealed copy, easily making it the rarest and most expensive game for the PS1, and perhaps the most expensive game throughout all generations of PlayStation hardware. The only other one that comes somewhat close is NBA Elite 11, which you might know was canceled right before it was released. Obviously, NFL Blitz 2000 Greatest Hits is an item only for the most dedicated of PlayStation collectors. But I will say, if you set out and said, I want to get a collection of every PS1 Greatest Hits game, that's not the craziest subset out there. Like, people go for full Greatest Hits and Player's Choice sets all the time. But for the PS1, NFL Blitz 2000 makes that subset a monumental task to complete. Even if you have the cash for it, just finding a copy is a serious challenge in and of itself. So to anyone doing that, I said it once and I'll say it again, tip of the hat to those trying to track this one down. Alright guys, that's all I have for this video. Let me know in the comments, are there any games that I missed that I should include in a possible third entry on this topic? Leave me a comment down below, and if you enjoyed, hit like and subscribe. Do go watch my first video on this topic as well, because there's a lot of great stuff there too. With that, have a good one everyone, enjoy your day, enjoy your night, and I'll see you in the next one.